CDAG Studios proudly presents a special segment of the almost daily ZenCast, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews. On today's episode, we take a look at The Batman, Hollywood's latest iteration of the iconic superhero. Welcome, folks. Gather round as DJ Zed digitally entertains us with a little bit of electro-metal remix live audio assets, live-to-tape digital performance, grunge mechanic. Welcome to this special episode of the Almost Daily ZenCast, presenting the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews. Today, a good hard look at The Batman. Dun dun dun. And here, folks, a tiny programming note. I really wish I had the means and capacity to legally and within the bounds of all copyright policies play for you the stunningly beautiful, although I think slightly redundantly overused, ever so tiny bit overused, Batman / Bruce Wayne theme. Despite my tiny downturn there in the middle of that sentence, it is a little bit too often. For a 3-hour-long movie, we heard that loop through one or two too many times. But it is simple, elegant, beautiful, and perfectly Batman. So it's not like I hated it. Okay. So, I really wish that I was that level of online content creator, that I had all the clearances and all the green flags to hit play, and we could enjoy just a nice little clip of that music. One of the things that I found interesting and weird about it is that my brain kept trying to turn it into the Jaws theme. But that's not any critique on the movie makers and the musicians / composers / creators that developed this film. Okay, so that's my opening note. I wish I could play it. I can't. Let's move on. Thank you for joining me. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and good night to you, dear listener, from wherever you are listening to this humble little podcast from around the mother planet Dirt. A whole massive 11 of you, and that's my imaginary number for like some number less than 20. That's magically probably slightly more than 20, but doesn't ever look like it. But yeah, from all over the planet, people are tuning in from 25 different countries, and I salute you all, whether you're listening today, right now, on whatever date it is, Monday, April 25th at 11. I thought for a hot second it said 11 a.m. and I'm like, that's physically impossible, because I literally said to myself out loud, hey, look, it's 11 a.m. right now, and I'm not on the air yet 40 minutes ago. or 30 minutes ago, whatever the correct math is. It's 11:41. My eyes are just starting to get a little of that early onset, alarming, I probably need reading glasses blur. But I digress. Welcome to the show. I am your humble, eccentric, and somewhat scatterbrained host. And today we're taking a look at the Batman. I've got some things to say about it, and they're not all bad. I understand that the Batman, this most recent movie, got some negative, kind of whiplash reviews and some response from audience. I saw some honest, random, generic commentary, and by that I just mean it's like someone on social media, I don't remember who, and I wouldn't call them out even if I did, because I just saw it. The thought made it into my brain that I understood their short, comment about it, but I didn't really stop to engage in the conversation. And generally speaking, I noticed that there's a bit of a sort of a contingent of audience out there that just wasn't into it. And some posts about it that I think, whilst convincing and interestingly articulated, intellectually dubious at best and sort of misleading and kind of intellectually dubious, intellectually dishonest, sort of unfair reads on the script in my opinion, because, and this is my own uninvestigated opinion. In other words, I saw this commentary get posted, I believe, from more than one or two different social media acquaintances out there in social media world. So it feels like it's a copy-paste job that's making the rounds. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've engaged in participating in, oh my gosh, this post is perfect. And it's a copy-paste campaign. They want you to copy-paste it for whatever technical reasons that apparently some people are convinced are very real, that copy-paste is more likely to go viral than sharing, technically speaking. I've never cared to spend the grueling amount of time I imagine it would be necessary to confirm or disprove either direction of that thesis. And there's nothing inherently wrong with copy-paste things, although they are like the bastard grandchild of chain letters, and I never really understood what good came out of chain letters besides the weird, warm, arguably artificial afterglow of feeling like you've participated in something and you have some lingering, tingling hope of something cool coming out of it. But I digress. Generally harmless, although occasionally the mechanic is used quite literally as, a scam device. But I'm not casting aspersions about the commentary. Sometimes I notice that a notion, a commentary, a copy-paste post will go viral. And I often, want to question whether or not the logic behind them is valid, because they just seem sort of suspicious a little to me. And this is one of them. And I don't have a bunch of other examples in mind to throw out in order to sort of help make this all make more sense contextually. But I'll just cut to the chase. In the days leading up to this movie coming out on the streaming platform, HBO Max, whilst people were watching it in theaters, which I was debating whether or not to do so, and some days I felt like maybe I should go this weekend, and other days I didn't. And I prefer to not go to movie theaters alone, unless I'm really weirdly, curiously, specifically in the mood to go to the movies alone, which usually strikes randomly in the middle of the week on a sunny afternoon when I want to go out for a burger, and like a margarita and a movie. And that's not often, right? And it sometimes has to do with quirky niche movies that I'm particularly interested in. And curiously, the Batman should have been a strong contender for causing that. And I actually almost did go once. And for weird technical reasons, I like started to think about doing, like I almost went out and did it, and then I just sort of canceled all those plans right in the last hot second. But that's neither here nor there. This critique that I heard running around on the internet, well, I don't know how viral it went. I know I saw it 3 times. It may or may not have been from 3 different people, but I know that I reacted to it once, and then the second time I saw it, it had to have been a different post because there was no react. And it was like on a different day, and it should have registered and like shown up that I'd already reacted to it. I didn't comment, but I did, click on the emoji react button. But then again, who knows? The mysteries of how some of these social media apps do and do not work. But to quickly, hopefully not too belaborously, recap, in my own words, hopefully not too terribly, recap this argument. It was casting aspersions of suspicion on the script and the way it operates. And it felt like it was coming from whoever the original author was, either intentionally or maybe not so intentionally, maybe sort of unconsciously. They felt like someone with a little bit of the voice, the way it was written. It was either written because the author felt this way, or, and forgive me for, parsing out a sort of potentially nefarious attribution that may or may not, I'm not accusing anyone specific of anything. I'm just saying, taking the text of the critique that I remember reading in abstract, presuming that the person sharing it in front of me on that was not the author, because it didn't seem like they were. Usually people will take credit, or there'll be a little bit more of a personal tone. And it looked like I said, I saw it more than once, and it looked like it was making the rounds as a copy-paste job. It sounded either authentically coming from someone convinced that movies are bad, /evil, /nefarious, most likely part of some evil project to cause evil effects on humanity at large. Or, so either it was written by someone who genuinely sort of has that background belief and is sort of like incredulously reviewing this movie, like, how can people not see it? Or it was written to create effectively that tone, that perceived point of view, that sort of, to put it another way, to endorse, perpetuate, and seduce people into endorsing and perpetuating that ideological bias. I could be wrong, like I said, and if I am wrong, I apologize, right? But my takeaways, I remember from reading this, were that the movie unfairly, which I take a disagreement with, right? The use of unfairly and the whole notion that it's about to be expressed. I take exception that the movie and the way the script works unfairly depicts someone simply fighting to expose the truth about systemic-wide corruption, and depicts, that's the bad guy, and the quote-unquote good guy is a sociopath running around taking justice into his own hands. Okay, now, that was my redux of it, right? Like I read a thing, I assessed it, I came across it a couple other times afterwards and sort of reread them again. Same wording, different people, no author attribution or credit taken, so let us presume the author is anonymous and hitherto unconfirmed, right? Having viewed the movie 1.5 times now, and I was seriously tempted just now, beginning this late morning, sitting down to the work desk later than I preferred to, especially given how effing early in the morning I magically woke up, feeling simultaneously like beat up and on the verge of just being incapable of operating like a human person, and also highly motivated to be very, 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 very productive, which is the existential catch-22 dilemma of my life at all times in my post burning the candle on both ends in the middle from my 20s and 30s into my whatever this chapter of my life is going to be called. I digress. Despite all that, I was tempted to watch the movie again just now, but then remembered it was 3 hours long. And every time I have to say the words 3 hours long, I'm instantly reminded of the jingle for the beginning of Gilligan's Island. 3-hour tour. And I don't know the rest of the song, but that bit just echoes in my mind every time anyone says 3 hours anything. So I was like, you know what? I don't want my entire day to go by. I was going to watch the movie and take notes. Curious, fun, awkward thing I'm instantly reminded of. I'm remembering right now in real time as I share with you these thoughts. So that I started doing that with the other Batman movies. I sat down one strange, awkward day, sort of in anticipation, knowing that the new Batman, the new movie was coming out relatively soon. I was like, I should sit down and watch all the Batman movies and just take notes as I go through them. And I have I don't remember how many episode of notes, how many minutes worth of notes I've got. But I got through some of them and not all of them. I mean, I think I watched all of them, but I did not take notes at all of them. I think by the time we got to the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger, I was just I don't know. I give up, man. Arnold Schwarzenegger's hilarious. They did not do Ivy justice, even though I love Uma Thurman, and I didn't know what to say, so I didn't take any notes. But I have copious amounts of notes about the first one that are almost absurd. The first Michael Keaton one, and with Jack Nicholson, and I hesitate to even get into them. But having said all that, I wanted to address this interestingly weird thing that was going around. And I say, all in all, and I wish I had it in front of me, but curiously, a few days later, a little closer to when I actually watched the movie, and maybe after the fact, I couldn't find it anymore. I didn't try very hard, I'll admit that. Is that intellectually lazy? Perhaps. But I did, give it a go, and it just wasn't coming up. And I was like, I'm not going to try for more than X number of minutes and X number of tries. And it's annoying. And sometimes I just can't think of the right keywords to get the right thing to come up. Even though that literally used to be my job. Back in the day when I worked as a professional, an online service provider professional inside a company, my desk job was to be Google, because Google didn't exist yet. There were other search engine sites, but the whole Google thing had not happened at all yet. Ask Jeeves. What were some of the other ones that were really popular? I know I used a collection of almost 12 different search things. There were so many of them that I don't remember. I didn't care what their names were. I was like, some of these give me different results. Some of them give me better results. Some of them give them more, but they're worth checking. I digress. So, based on my less than perfect memory, I want to take an exception to the overall critique because, and here's why. I find it difficult to agree with any kind of third-party depiction of the Riddler character as some kind of good guy deserving praise. Now, even in their own content, their own bonus content, I've got I just let the screen go black. In their own bonus content, if you happen to be fortunate enough to have access to HBO Max, they have these little segments varying in length. There's an 8-minute segment entitled The Batman, not colon, but colon, the two dots. Vengeance meets justice. And it's one of those things that Batman, this is one of those moments where in the movie universe, Batman refers to himself, how he gets asked, who are you? A lot. It's sort of a thing. It's sort of a touchstone moment in Batman movies and in Batman culture. Who are you? What are you as a variant? And there's the classic, I am Batman, or whatever he says. In this one, he answers, I am vengeance. Now, there is a world of commentary that can be had just on that choice alone. But let's before we spiral out of control, let's come back to this theater release era commentary critique. I cannot agree with, intellectually, any attempt to spin the Joker as a freedom fighter, as a liberator of the city, just like I couldn't agree with any attempt to do that with what's his name, despite his delightfully charming tone of voice. Oh, Lordy, bless my mind. I'm such a nerd and I don't remember what his name is. The mountainous man with the funny thing on his face that we never really quite understood the reasoning for, other than that something happened to him when he lived in the pit. That guy, the guy that blows up the football stadium, no matter how much you try to whitewash that, these characters are not meant to be perversely believed as any expression of goodness in any real, tangible sense, right? Sure. In the way this particular version of the Batman story is expressed, sorry, I'm switching teacups for my second cup. Not that I just drank the entire whole first cup there from a while ago. You could, okay, I mean, free speech, you can say, but the Riddler's a good guy because he's right, because he's on a mission, and you can, he gets very, the character is very passionate and he's zealous. He's got zealotry, the energy of a zealot in his motivation. It could have, might have, and I don't know how I would have felt if they had made it sort of pseudo-religious, like you can always add that. But I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I've said many a time, and I will stand by this statement as a matter of public discourse, that I think we can build consensus on this. No matter how good you might want to frame any given individual's intentions, the moment you start behaving in unconscionable, immoral, unethical ways, you get that privilege of being a good guy taken away from you, right? And so what this critique misses is the way in which this movie tries in its own fashion, in its own style, in its, using its own motifs to express the ethical, moral conundrum, dilemma, riddle of the Batman character in general, which is why we love him, right? Batman, for however brutal, however dark, however relentless, however potentially easily perceived as a sociopath he may be, he is I'm sure there are exceptions. I'm sure super nerds from the realm of comic book readership will be able to point to me all the times Batman's done something horrible, right? And absolutely. And the cinematic depictions of Batman have fluctuated all over the place, especially the early legacy stuff. But I think we can agree, if we narrow the focus to this particular movie, that this expression of the character is clear, and it's an unfair mischaracterization to depict this Batman as the bad guy working for the evil corruption of the state, because he's not. Right? He's not directly. He's in league. If there is anyone, the Justice League arguably doesn't exist in this particular moment, this chapter of the Batman verse in this movie, right? But if we were to pretend that it did, the members are exclusively at the very beginning Batman / Bruce Wayne, Alfred / whatever his guerrilla warfare, military dog tag nickname might be, because I really like the version of Pennyworth that's like got a background that's laden with his own journey into the moral quagmire that is, the military lifestyle, right? That's fertile ground for storytelling in my mind. As long as you always root the journey in the catharsis of understanding that there are limits for the capacity to violence, right? To solve anything. There are limits in one's right to justify violence. There are limits in how we choose to respond to violence. That is the crux, in my humble opinion. Not always articulated eloquently and beautifully in the Batman movie cinematic DC universe, but always sort of inherently at the core. Now, I grew up watching the TV show with the infamous cast of characters. All of the actors' names have suddenly gone from my mind, but whom I grew up knowing and being able to articulate most of the time. Shame, because one of the Joker's last name is Romero, Caesar Romero, and that's a name I should know for reasons. And but Batman's Bruce Wayne, I forgot. But I digress. In this movie, if one is to fairly, accurately describe these characters, the Riddler is a morally flawed, sociopathic, like deeply, and these are my words now, deeply traumatized, like deeply spiritually traumatized, deeply psychologically traumatized, deeply emotionally traumatized, hyper intellectual, but also deeply intellectually traumatized villain who wants to believe in his cause, but is in violation of the laws that I think we could all build consensus are fair and just and should be followed. Sure, are there unfair laws? Great, that's a whole what if debate. That's a bunch of whataboutism. But we are presented this world, this Gotham, and Gotham is always generically dark, morbidly high crime rates, morbidly corrupt. Just it's a bad place, and there are very few good guys. And what is consistent with canon, and I can't speak to always I can't speak to have an intimate knowledge of all the cinematic work. Even that I fail at. But most of the main movies, like for example, I'm still working my way through Pennyworth. Right, I haven't seen that. A lot of the animated stuff I've only seen a handful of. I haven't seen all of it, but arguably, Batman is a vigilante, but a chaotic. Is there a chaotic lawful category in roleplay? Right? Am I crazy, or am I imagining that? Is that from another universe, not here in this universe? Is it chaotic neutral? He's not neutral. He considers himself we explore this in this film, and that's what makes this film a really decent expression of the Batman stuff. It ranks better than I cite many of them in terms of how Batman is portrayed, simply at an aesthetic value, at the character work with the actor, etc. It's up there in my book, in my mind. I don't want to give it a number, but it's up there, let's say, in the top 5 of all Batman movie versions, for sure. Arguably the top 3. Because there's some really good ones that, have things in them that I don't like. And some of the ones that are my favorites also sort of missing stuff. One thing I want to give this movie credit for is not belaboring in a sort of, we've seen this 1,000 times kind of way, the origin story. We all know the origin story. We all know what happened. We don't need to see some new awesome slow motion shot of pearls falling to the ground and, blood splatter on the character that is either the Joker or whoever the new bad guy is. And it's obviously still intrinsic. It's still there. It's still at the core of the story. And it's because it didn't give it to us. It's 3 hours long, and there's a little bit of flashbacking, which is cool. But they didn't give us the what's the word? The preamble, the prelude of here is young Bruce Wayne. I mean, we do see a little Bruce Wayne, but we don't see them leaving the theater, getting accosted, getting assaulted, etc. Now, the question of what is and is not in the final cut of a movie is an interesting one. And I guess for some people kind of out of bounds in terms of critique. But I'm my own sort of weirdo, and I just want to talk about whatever I want to talk about when it comes to watching movies. I'm not here to critique them necessarily, but just share my thoughts. Sometimes those will be critiques, sometimes those will be praises, sometimes those will just be anecdotal inferences and interesting ideas that are inspired by the movie. But I digress. Other thoughts while I get to this segment that I want to play real quick before I go way spiraling out of control. So I was saying that I was going to sit down and take notes. I sort of started to do that, and I thought, you know what? I'll start with the special features. And I realized, I discovered that there's a scene in there that I really wish had been in the movie. So let's roll the tape on this 10-minute, almost 8-minute and 45-second note that I made just, moments before going live on the air to myself about that missing scene and other stuff. I'm genuinely surprised that I discovered a deleted scene for The Batman that's the Batman interviewing the Joker in Arkham Asylum. And most of the time, while I enjoy deleted scenes, I also see, pretty clearly, I can understand in my mind, they decided not to include that because of this or that. And or for just general need of time. You need to trim it down. Now, let's remember, this version of the Batman, this new movie, which is interesting because it's it's a first in a sort of reboot of the property, but it's the way it's structured, it drops you into the middle of the second chapter of Batman's career progression. It isn't a retelling of the beginning. It isn't some initial thing. So the Batman and the Joker, which is traditionally, especially if you were to treat the existing legacy films and the Michael Keaton ones in particular as some form of loosey-goosey canon, then, that nemesis motion has already happened in the cinematic universe. They've already had their big clash. And now we're in the Arkham setting where, he may be a future threat, but he's at least sort of temporarily locked down. The scene is brilliant. I'm really torn about the makeup that they used for this particular expression of the Joker. The Joker is a longtime comic book media favorite of mine, in as much as that I've always been bizarrely fascinated by the iconicness of this character's face and the choices made in designing it. And of course, whenever a film property or a television show decides to make interesting changes that step away from whatever you might call the middle ground of the overall conceptual design of this character, I'm intrigued, and sometimes I've been impressed, and sometimes I haven't. The movie Joker, Warner Brothers' Joker, is brilliant. And I think that I can't find anything that I disapprove of in it. I've seen, first of all, well, not first of all, backing up, just for clarity, I'm not a consummate completionist fan of DC content. And for those who are relatively new to my podcast, I never claimed to be a well-read expert of the comic books either. In fact, I'm really transparent and upfront about the fact that my comic book fandom is limited to a lifetime of flipping through whatever's on the shelf at the bookstore or comic book stand or whatever I happen to find them at in the various times and places that I found myself looking at comic books. I've flipped through countless comic books, admired the art, really sat and stared at a page or two and sort of flipped through to get a general idea of what's going on in any particular given issue that I've picked up. But never would I, never did I, and never would I, never could I claim to have had an in-depth reading relationship. That was books for me. So, okay, to the movie. I have watched a bazillion comic book-based superhero movies. That is the root place, the basement, the foundation of my comic book character fandom at all. So this particular expression of the Joker was particularly interesting, novel, unique, and still within the confines of what you expect to see. It's within the realm, evocative of, and to me, not particularly disappointing. I was a little bit, like I was about to start saying, a little bit of two minds about the makeup. The progression of different makeup choices throughout movies that have depicted this character have always been fascinating. And in this case, his skin is like deeply disfigured and discolored, presumably because he's, sticking to sort of the classic acid bath chemical disaster that causes his clown-like appearance, or at least the reason for him to wear makeup. There is always this question of, does the Joker wear makeup, or does the Joker have really eerily, unnaturally bleached white skin? And in some cases, it's been sort of both. Classic example, the very first Michael Keaton Batman movie. From my reading of it, my understanding of it, my lifetime of having viewed it multiple times, his skin gets literally bleached blank white. And then in a very clever sort of fun scene, he wears like natural tone makeup to try to look like a regular flesh colored person for one scene. But then of course it all gets messed up because what's her name splashes his face with water. In this case, this Joker looks a little bit like an irradiated survivor in a post-apocalyptic, everyone's sort of fighting off the mutagen, whatever it is, disaster movie, and it's sort of gross. And they incorporated the more butchery, sort of brutal. His smile is unnaturally grinny, and there's like jagged, rippy damage that's calloused over. He also has sort of like a fixed, it looks like his grin is a makeup application along the lines of what they did with Jack Nicholson. And so that the corners are rigid and not super expressive, but that's what achieves the like extenuated smile. But in this particular instance, for this deleted scene, it's all like lopsided and gross, and his teeth are horrific. Like a British billy goat. It's like, whoa. And it's really delightful how they, for a deleted scene, you spend almost the entire time not seeing the full reveal. Even when you've got a relatively clear view of him, they play with focus, and, he's in a cell with a full panel wire mesh, division panel window thing. It's a great scene, and I'm actually surprised that it got cut. I think they could have made some room for that sequence. right where it seems to belong after the thing when he goes to Arkham. I believe, and I don't know off the top of my head because it was a few days ago that I watched it initially and then like rewatched it and fell asleep in the middle of it. And I meant to watch it a third time and take notes, and I've yet to do that, and which is what we're doing now. But I believe they replaced this Joker scene with a scene right there in time in that real moment with a scene where he. No, maybe I'm conflating things. At some point, he has a very similar scene where he's interviewing the Riddler, and I've got a bunch to say about that, but we're gonna pause here because I've been rambling for almost 10 minutes. Okay, so much for keeping this episode short and snappy. So many things left to say. But I wanted to reemphasize my long-winded statement from the opening of the bit. Oh, also, I wanted to back up and apologize to anyone listening going, spoilers, who may not have seen the movie yet. I'm from a generation before that sort of cultural sensitive area trigger label was identified, and people just talked about movies. I can think of a movie that really sort of delineated the transition, pardon the pun, and some people may not get that is a pun until they find out. I can't remember the name of the movie now. But this movie, mid-90s, right? What was it called? It was a sensation. It was a sizzler. It was a murder mystery wrapped in a sexy package, and it had like a special extra twist, which was just the reveal that the female gender depicted character was actually a cross-dressing transsexual man that was pre-op, or half-op. I don't know what the right terminology is, and I'm not trying to be rude. But this movie, whose title, and please forgive me that I can't remember the name of this movie, it was a sensation, and it was hugely popular and wildly controversial, right? And a lot of people really, really kind of weirded out by it and shocked by the twist, and offended and grossed out. And a lot of people just admired it, applauded it, and said, hey, great for representation, There's a bunch of people that sort of are stuck in this unfortunate place where they can't be themselves, and so crazy things happen. And I think it was a murder mystery too. So, and I don't remember who the killer was at all. So I don't want to. And but the point the reason I'm bringing this movie up for anyone I almost just forgot right there. I'm like, what am I talking about? Whatever it's called. Forever after, I know because of that movie, spoiler alert, became a thing. Before that movie, if it was being used, I had not come across it. And I was an avid movie enthusiast, not an expert, not, I wouldn't actually have called myself a connoisseur and meant it at the time. I would have called myself a connoisseur in a joking, giggly, I'm too young to have seen enough movies to legitimately call myself a connoisseur, like the way I couldn't have called myself at that age a connoisseur of anything. Because let alone, the fancy adult things that we usually associate with connoisseur, like fancy expensive food and beverages that, are adult beverages, etc. But I digress. I love movies, and I continue to love, not all aspects of, but the sort of intellectually satisfying elements of, which are not all, but of the media culture around, hyping movies. Like there's something fun about a good, interesting movie that has a great series of publicity events that are engaging and that tantalize me about the movie, make me feel curious about the movie, and don't make me hate the movie for revealing everything before I go there, before I go to watch it. But I digress. Having said that, whatever the name of that movie was, historically, one could attribute it to the completing. It completed the mainstreamification if it was already around. And if it didn't, it just lit a fire and kickstarted right from the ground up the normalization and popularization of spoiler. At first it was no spoilers. First it was a denial, like a rejectionary statement, like please don't spoil things. Then it became a sort of alarm, at least from my recollection and my perception of it. Then we sort of transitioned into spoiler alerts. Sort of like, be careful, be careful. I am going to talk about spoilers. And my point in all of this spirally discussion here in this moment is to apologize to you, dear listener. I shoulda, coulda, woulda opened up the show with the very beginning of like a de facto boilerplate. It's got to be a part of every episode. Spoiler alert warning that when I'm talking about the movie, I'm doing it in the sort of like book or movie club review form. That's like, we all watched the movie, right? Or you really want to watch the movie and you don't care because you're interested in my opinion because you're a fan of the show. I don't know. So if you haven't seen it yet and you're like, oh man, I apologize. I hope you stopped listening and hope you're not mad. And if you are mad, I hope you don't cancel me. And if you're still listening and you're a little miffed, I apologize. But you know now, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews always come with a disclaimer, pre-built, pre-assumed, pre-imagined in the very beginning. You should consider it as part of like the loadout of like, we're doing this now. We're sitting down to contemplate this. Okay, so spoiler alert, retroactively implemented spoiler alert. A deleted scene is not that terrible, in my mind, not terrible of a spoiler alert. But then again, anyone who would be like with me in my camp of like, that should have been in the movie. Even though I would have been like, not my favoritist of all possible, makeup design, character designs for the Joker. Pretty awesome scene, which I think would have been effective and useful and entertaining and worked given that the whole thing is, this is the most authentically like film noirish police detective. And that's what he is, kind of. He's an unofficial, off the books, vigilante detective. And although we don't associate this with the character overtly, it doesn't seem like, it always seemed implied to me, probably because of the old school like Saturday morning, Sunday morning TV show, that he was in some form or fashion a postmodern or whatever era that TV show was supposed to be set in. It reads like the 50s sometimes, but then also has episodes that read like the 60s and 70s sometimes, and in other times has had episodes that I guess are supposed to be the 80s. So I don't know what's going on with that show. I don't remember it anymore. In terms of critical analysis, I remember in terms of intuitive impressions and like artistic, inspirational things that just are iconic that read with me. But in that version of Batman, he's sort of like a Sherlock Holmes. He gets there and everyone else is an idiot compared to him. And he's like, aha, look at this. Aha, look at that. You guys didn't think of that. And whether like in this camporific, cheesy, hyper colorful pastel, goofy looking, Joker has a mustache that he paints over. And actually, for whatever reason, that visually makes more sense than the episodes where he's shaved off the mustache. It's just like, no, Caesar, put the mustache back. I'm fairly certain it's because it's his real mustache and it was his trademark and he didn't want to shave it off and he shaved it off and then it just looked weird because it's Caesar Romero as the Joker. That's one of the other things about that Joker that may not be as cool or as like upfront in the way you read it now as a post retro viewer, for all you youngins. But although I was technically of this exact same category when I was watching it, and it was definitely into its however many decades, everlasting, what did we call it? It was the thing you really wanted your show to do. After its initial run, you wanted it to get published, bud. You wanted it to get bifurcated. You wanted it to get licensed to be rebroadcast by other channels, which had an industry term that I can't recall right now. But as a kid, I knew what that was. Syndicated. Syndication, man. That was the shit. If you got syndicated, then like some quirky weirdo goofy, because back then there was only like 13 channels, right? We had knobs on the TV. Now, there wasn't digital numbers. There was a physical knob that clicked through a mechanical dial that set the diodes to the right frequencies on the receiver mechanic, and it was all freaking, what's the word? Error, file not found. Not monolithic. No, because nothing is monolithic. That's a pin on the board. At any rate, I digress. Analog. Everything was analog. Sherlock Holmes. So this movie, without trying to do any direct Sherlock Holmesian things, he's definitely like a pretty smart guy that's a little bit belligerent about his trauma-based, self-prescribed. He gave himself this mission, right, to defend those who cannot stand up to the criminal element in this unfortunately messed up, dark, very criminal city. And yes, there's an exposure of corruption in the very systems that are supposed to be lifting up the little guys, right? That is a very important theme in the movie, but it's not an honest, sincere, freedom-fighting, everyday, average Joe Schmo citizen of a hero that's exposing the corruption. It's a loony bin, cuckoo, nutjob, murder, kill, stab, blow people up, don't give a fuck if people die, sociopath that you can't just spin an argument that guy is getting the short end of the stick and that he's doing the righteous thing. No, I'm sorry. You can't make any kind, in my mind, and this is just me, folks, and I'm not trying to make, I was having a random, totally not very related tangent. I was having a sort of uninvited discussion in my DMs with some gentleman that I'm going to not talk to anymore for a hot minute, just because I don't like random people just abruptly transitioning from something they see in a comment thread into my personal space, because that's not what I use DMs for, right? Like, but then again, no one's using DMs for what I want to use them for, so it is. Like, it's supposed to be like, hey, I'm a listener of the podcast, and I have this question I want you to discuss on the show. And if people are doing that and they're just not saying, hey, I'm aware of your show, and I'm just being weirded out by it, and because of the misunderstanding, I apologize. But the thing was about labels and isms, right? Like, I'm not trying to create an ism about the things that I believe. But, as was pointed out, I forget by whom in this conversation, anti-ism becomes an ism, which becomes problematic. That may or may not have made sense to people, but if you're following along, rock on. Thanks. So, if we're looking at this movie clearly, it's fantasy, right? Let's be honest. Let's be fair. It's action fantasy, so there's violence. But there's a sort of moral code, an ethics, let's say, if we want to stay away from the word moral, there's an ethical code that each character is choosing to utilize, stand up for, deploy, and, struggles with the cinematically sort of gritty, real, but fake, but real moral dilemmas of wrestling with, like, wow, I deal with all this violence, and where do I draw the line? In this film, in this fictional world, both the Joker and the Riddler do not deserve to have followers that praise them and mimic their actions. They do not. Their behavior, their actions, their choices are beyond the pale. We do not want a society full of people that behave in that same level of extreme preemptive violence. So it's creepy and questionable and suspicious AF to me that there's an impassioned argument for some sort of topsy-turvy analysis of this movie saying the good guys are depicted as bad guys, and they shouldn't be. And the evil, corrupt system is depicted as the good guys, which they're not. The evil, corrupt system is exposed as evil and corrupt. Batman being the sort of superhero extension of the police department, which is controversial even within the police department. And then he's literally in this movie depicted as trying to earn the right? He has means and skills and assets that the police department does not have. He advocates for non-gun violent action, right? He's a self-defense ninja, is what Batman is. That's what makes him badass. He's a billionaire, to sort of co-opt from the wrong character, from the wrong universe. He's a billionaire, philanthropist, playboy, technologist, right? And I didn't even accurately quote the line. But he's a billionaire technologist. He's a billionaire entrepreneur. He's a billionaire, what's the word? He's a mogul. He's an empire. He has an empire. Let's come full circle and bring it back to legit Batman language that's common and sort of, it pulls from the common cultural references of Americana. He is a pillar of society, Bruce Wayne, right? And he's got a complex relationship with his Bruce Wayne persona. He's willing to sacrifice the luxury and the lifestyle and the means and the assets. Now, it's a bit foolhardy because if he completely burns his entire family empire, how can he continue to be Batman? But that's sort of one of those questions that's we see it, but the character doesn't, and that's what makes the character endearing to us. And he's got to work out whatever the hell these things that are, blinding him and making him feel that despondently bleak about his mission. He is a sort of borderline anti-hero, but he's not quite the Punisher, right? And let's Disney asterisk the Punisher. Ha ha ha. But how many Trump supporting anti-cancel culture, cancel patriots, patriot haters, hating patriot. I'm not sure how to conjugate that one, but patriots that are full of self-righteous hate. Oh, someone made a good one. There's a meme about, Christian patriots that are full of Christian patriot hate. And then they made some sort of cool word mush label out of that. And I don't remember what it is, but how many of them are taking off the Punisher stickers off their bumper sticker, because Disney owns it and Disney's not exactly a corporate person anymore in the eyes of the GOP and the Trumptopian empire. But I digress, right? We cannot normalize what the villains in the DC universe that's the whole point. The whole point of these stories are to say when people take violence and ideas like justice, ideas like vengeance, ideas like retribution, ideas like who is and who is not worthy of living freely in a mixed society with problems, and applies their own brute force will in a sort of might makes right kind of way, you lose all credibility as a good guy. Hello, look at the real world. It's my entire position on what's going on in almost every world conflict. You can spin me a beautiful story about the other guys being the bad guys, but as soon as you're slitting people's throats, which I cannot advocate and I'm not promoting in any way, shape, or form, as soon as you're doing horrible, horrible things, and Batman rides that line. That's why he's intriguing. That's why he's a badass. That's why he's evocative and sort of controversial to us as a character at large. Never mind this particular movie. Does this movie do all of that justice in a brilliantly depicted, wonderful way? I'm a little mixed. I'll be honest. I totally get why some people are like, I just couldn't get into it. Did I fail to get into it? Not at all. I appreciated it. I liked it. my complaint about the deleted scene is only an after the fact kind of, tacking the donkey tail on the donkey sort of complaint. I did feel it was a little belabored at points. And there were things that were lost on me in the beginning. But some of the things that are coming into focus for me now is that I appreciate that in multiple ways, subtle and direct, this Batman says no to gun violence. This Batman stands up to sociopaths who think they can just butcher other people with projectile body, death machines, and think that that is somehow some righteous thing to do. He refuses that. He will get brutal. And here's one of the things I was thinking about Batman. Has Batman ever killed anybody? I'm not sure. One could argue that in the cinematic universe, probably, I don't know what the actual answer is in the comic book universe. And I won't be surprised if it's yes. He probably has. And they've probably tried to, in some form or fashion, explore and or address the moral dilemma they're in. In the cinematic universe, I'm going to give it a big, gracious sort of, what's the term? Not grain of salt, although that's sort of applicable. Benefit of the doubt. I haven't seen every inch of celluloid of Batman cinematic history, but I've seen a big bulk of it, the vast plurality. And in my mind, in the movies I have seen, he has not killed anyone on purpose intentionally, as in in a murderous outrage. Has he opened cans of whoop ass? Absolutely. Has he beat someone up? And could you make the argument that dude, no normal person would have survived that? Yeah, probably, sure. Did they die on screen? I don't think so. But like Superman, and the reason there is a Justice League, and all the other characters in there, they take a stance against murder. We're not going to murder people to achieve our goals, political, societal, ideological, or otherwise, and we're not going to stand idly by while others do. Bruce Wayne is someone driven by the passion to either prevent or at least hold accountable those who will live a criminal lifestyle and then choose to live by violence, right? And in this film, in the most direct and overt and clear and undeniable way, he says no to guns. And he says no to other people getting seduced into the perceived solution of vengeance through gun violence, right? If we're going to really be honest about the script, that other assessment that I keep returning to is really unfair and critically flawed, and arguably fails to prove that the movie is doing the sinister brainwashing, what did they call it? Predictive programming that it claims that it is, because the statements about the way the character assessments are not valid. They're not valid. Not if you're watching the movie with clarity and from a ethically stable, morally rooted place, and not presuming the worst possible, if sometimes improbable, set of assumptions about what's going on in the movie, in the text, in the imagery. To the best of my understanding, and this is one of those things where, yes, does Batman, in the course of his investigatory practices, as a slightly beyond the framework of the law investigator, he's a private dick. He's Dick Tracy, but billionaire status, and with a technologists, engineers, manufacturing mogul sort of mentality of well, if I'm going to endanger myself, I'm going to do it from a position of invincibility, thanks to the fact that I have loads of money. And although, right, like I've been connecting some references to the old school show in which he's literally dressed up in a satin Halloween costume. This Batman is wearing stuff that's bulletproof. And although, of course, there's some design flaws, like you could just shoot him in the jaw, face, mouth, and pretty much end whatever he's doing. He quite boldly, and to the best of my recollection, without ever using a gun that he disarms from an attacker, without using that gun back on them in a like fatal way, takes on and stands up to effectively sociopathic gun violence, terrorists. This guy, the sort of incredulous argument is that this guy's unfairly labeled a terrorist in the movie because he's exposing deeply problematic corruptions in the city-state apparatus. The thing is, Batman takes those things seriously. He's not trying to protect the city-state. He's trying to hold this guy accountable, prevent him from committing any other atrocities, and figure out, like, what he doesn't understand. And he's trying to Batman is ultimately trying to figure out whether or not this guy knows who Batman is. And there's a delightful scene where they play with that in a way that I didn't see coming. I wasn't expecting in that moment, and that I ultimately found really, like, surprisingly satisfying. He's also trying to, Batman is, in the course of this film, find out whether or not the accusations of corruption against his own family are as valid and as real as those making the accusations would like the world to believe. Now, another level of sort of you have to analyze the characters really clearly before you determine what the script is actually about, right? Although I don't think the payoff in the revelation is as emotionally satisfying as I would have liked it to be, the mystery there plays out in such a way that you cannot argue that the Wayne family is an evil, complicit member of whatever corrupt overlord society class. He was a flawed human being that was trying to fight the good fight and made some choices that he shouldn't have made. And that's a mixed bag, right? Catwoman. Beautifully played, beautifully acted, mysterious, engaging, beautiful, and convincingly portrayed as someone desperate to like everybody in this film, every character in this film is attempting to get their comeuppance, right? Like to rectify in whatever ways they can understand that they might be able to rectify something in their past that they perceive as a serious and offensive injustice. Batman, obviously, his parents' murder. The Riddler, obviously, the things that they use in the script of the Riddler, and Catwoman, this thing that is, mysteriously not revealed until we see Batman make an error in his judgment. Batman is a flawed human being. He's not a monolith of good. He's a dude that's fed up with the way the status quo, that is outraged that he was orphaned, hasn't really fully acknowledged his privilege as he gets called out although not directly in the way that nuanced scene, turns out. You're like, oh wow, that didn't end up with the aha moment that I thought it was going to be. It's the aha moment in the other direction. And now I guess I'm trying to avoid a spoiler moment, while also talking very directly about that scene. But let's just spoiler alert. If you're still listening and you don't like spoilers and you're still listening, here's a spoiler alert. Fast forward 30 seconds or more. Or just bear with it. Or put this episode aside until you can come back and watch it, listen to it later. That scene where the Batman, out of desperation, goes to the Riddler in Arkham, right? And is like, what the fuck is this all about? At least I was led to believe that the Riddler was going to reveal some trap that exposed the Batman, right? He's constantly talking about unmasking. He gets unmasked. He acknowledges somewhere, and I don't remember where in relationship to the scene, in some video footage that we're watching, to his followers, says that he will have been unmasked by the time that they show up to do his bidding as blind faith warriors of some kind of militant nature, and commit gun violence. Politicized, politically motivated, political gun violence. And for the record, in case it's not clear, I'm adamantly opposed to real life, politically motivated, religiously motivated, socio-ideologically motivated gun violence. I'm generally opposed to gun violence. I'm not opposed to guns. I'm not super into guns. But I'm not opposed to them. I am in favor of sensible, real life, manageable, sustainable, sane, meaningful, actually functional gun regulations in our society. But that's a whole nother episode full of whole other discussions. But on that note, I tell you what, if I had been born into money the way the character had been born into money, and that character existed, or some shadow, some hint of, some key to that character, that idea existed, some set of circumstances that would have inspired, because there's that, now obviously infamous and overplayed meme, there's X many billionaires in the world today, not one of them, as of yet, has chosen to literally become Batman. And they could. I mean, Elon Musk is doing whatever the heck he thinks he's doing. And there's a lot of reasons to worry that he's not really doing it for the best possible reasons. But who knows? I don't know. And I'm not casting aspersions. You could always suspect people, all kinds of people, anybody, of anything. And that's often ridiculous. And that's one of the things that happens here, right? In this movie. To uncover injustice, to expose corruption, is good and true and righteous in my mind, so long as you do not become the violent aggressor. And Batman stands for that. He neutralizes those who are aggressing, violating, victimizing others, and then does his best to facilitate the rescue and evacuation of those caught in the chaos. So, is the system corrupt? Of course. Is this movie trying to get us to blindly just accept corruption? No, I really don't think so. Especially given that there's dialogue, there's overt tactical dialogue between Batman and the guy that eventually becomes his go-to commissioner, Gordon, I think, right? He's supposed to be, is he? Let me look at he plays James Gordon. Jeffrey Wright plays James Gordon. So they have this discussion. Like, as a police officer, the no guns thing is a place that he's not going to go. But why do police officers in America rely so heavily on guns? And that's a touchy subject. It's layered with complexity. It's layered with good actors and bad actors. There's good cops, there's bad cops. There's good people being victimized by cops. There's bad people being brought to justice by cops. A moment of silence there for those who have been victimized by cops. Brought to you by the fact that I've talked myself hoarse and needed to cough, so I muted the mic. So all of these complex issues are at play in this movie in a way that's not appropriately represented, or that doesn't. It's just they don't do that argument. It's floating out there. Does not do the movie justice. Is it the most brilliant movie ever made? No. Is it the best detective movie ever made? No. Is it the best action film ever made? No, not that. Maybe, I don't know. Does it have its weak spots? For sure. Did it need to be 3 hours long? No. Did I enjoy almost all of it? Yes, actually. Did I enjoy the way they depict the tense relationship between law enforcement and this guy? Admittedly, let's be blunt, a rich white billionaire that is, according to some of them, a criminal element, a member of the criminal element, right? That not to be trusted and definitely not to be included in police work. But that's sort of the obvious pink elephant in the room about Batman and the argumentation there. Something we've experienced a real life backlash and argument about in American society is, like, where do you draw the line in the arming and militarization of the police, right? Like, Batman exists in Gotham City because the police are not capable of being militarized enough in their gear and equipment. So a billionaire with military industrial complex level assets and manufacturing capabilities creates his own personal one-man army, which becomes a two-man army once you involve occasionally the notion of him recruiting a sidekick, which we may or may not see anytime soon, and because it's a thing that works but doesn't work and works and doesn't work. It works in some of the TV shows. I've really sort of liked the exploration of that relationship, and I forget which show, but I digress. Coming back, reeling it back in. That's at the crux. Let me put it this way. In my worldview, the problem, the rat's nest of problematic issues around guns, gun violence, gun legislation, the militarization of the police, the normalization of using gun violence as a solution in our society is at the core of my podcast. So, as someone who's spent a lot of time, for better or worse, thinking about it, intelligently or otherwise, and discussing it articulately or maybe, comedically, clownishly, I have my opinions. I have my lines drawn in my mind. And I've always looked to Batman as an archetype, as a character, as an abstraction that I'm analyzing in my own mind and drawing my own conclusions about, which is what we do with art, right? And literature and other forms of expression and storytelling. And I've always chosen to see Batman as a character wrestling with the problematic temptation of violence. And he's allowed himself as a self-defense ninja, if we're going to call him some other thing, in another universe, in another comic book, right? There's I just recently came across a headline somewhere on the multiverse of social media professional e-zine articles. And oh my, did I so much want to start my own internet magazine back in the day, when there was like 4 of them in the whole world. But I never did, so that sucks. Somewhere in a parallel universe not too far away from here, there's a universe where I did. There's a lot of parallel universes that I'm articulately aware of based on the decisions I've made in my life, where I'm hopefully living out the inverse opposite and the collection of variations thereof. Okay, so I've always looked at Batman as a dark figure willing to do the shadow work to neutralize sociopathic violent aggression, right? What does that mean? That means he is willing to get beat up. He's willing to put his life on the line. He's willing to be well-equipped but technically unarmed. He's willing to be a knight in shining armor, figuratively and literally. He's willing to engage in violence with a code, an ethical, legal code, for the purposes not of butchering the enemy and murdering them and putting them in the ground and drinking from their skulls, as some characters in some... Sorry for the object collision noise. And so, as some characters in some literary universes might, quite iconically sing about and relish in, but rather to bring people who've crossed the line to justice in an attempt to say, hey, world, this is beyond the pale, and so I have to take extreme measures. The cops shouldn't have to be wrapped head to toe in munitions protective gear in order to do their job. Right? Now, I say that as a citizen of the world who doesn't want to see some militarization of police forces, police services. Let us remember, it is a service being rendered by the state. That language means something. And if these different agencies operate as if that doesn't, then who holds them accountable? Who polices the police? There is no Batman. Folks, this is an outlandish statement, but I was one of those kids that was living the attitude of the meme before the meme existed. I wanted to either be Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, or occasionally the Hulk. In case of like World War III breaking out, I was like, I'm going to have to be the Hulk, man. Ultimately, I realized I had to design my own superhero. And if that idea entices you, friends, if you've appreciated this spirally, wandering, meandering walk we've taken through a viewership response to the iconic Batman character being freshly minted in a new, exciting cinematic adventure, you might be curiously enticed by the prospect that I am indeed developing my own superhero, supervillain, action, comic book, sci-fi adventure metaverse, which if you have or have not yet caught on is what I talk about when I reference the Zeppoverse. Please do receive the invitation to visit and explore the many dimensions of the Zeppoverse. And it is in like early planning, development, beta stages. Nothing is a complete product yet. All of it is an exploration of the ideas in an attempt to earn the respect and admiration of an early adopter audience that will engage with me as a sort of public discourse, collaborative, collective partner. And hopefully discover a few special, awesome individuals that will also step up to the opportunity to be sort of like a social media facilitator in the production and investment, capital investment fundraiser type. And you can explore all that. What's that sales jargon? From sales jargon you land? No purchase required. No purchase necessary. You absolutely for free by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. That's the bookmark link data center, spinal cord of the Zeppoverse. And as the Zeppoverse grows and more platforms become involved, you will be able to discover them there. And please note, it's a whole fresh new landing page, whatever you call it. It's a whole new solo.to page. Thanks to the early stages of some of that charitable work that's coming in, charitable giving that's supporting the Zeppoverse. I was able to afford to upgrade from the basic free account. By the way, real genuine, internet influencer endorsement. If you're looking for a simple, basic, easy to maintain, easy to edit, easy to use, easy to remember, link collection, bookmarky, landing page thing service for free or for really, really, really low down, reasonable rates, especially now during given inflationary madness times, solo.to does it all. Okay, so check it out. Please do visit. I'll wrap up my thoughts on the Batman. It's a better movie than those trying to pan it give it credit for, I think. It isn't for everybody. Not every movie is always going to be. So setting aside all those who just inherently didn't find it interesting, that's all forgivable. Those trying to cast aspersions and critique it, I haven't found a critique that I can buy into and agree with yet. And there are probably, real silly things. Movies that I like always grow on me over time, if that makes sense. My perception of them, my appreciation of them, and my ability to notice things about them changes over time. Some of the crazy notes I took about the very first Batman movie are interesting, and they're things that I'm like, I realized after saying them that I never really noticed that. One of these days, I should get around to releasing those as an episode, sort of in the way that I played this note from earlier today. But bottom line, if you're a Batman fan, watch it. And if you haven't watched it yet, go watch it. I'm going to guess half of all Batman fans or more out there in the world have already seen it. But if you are a Batman fan that's been on the fence, wasn't sure, didn't know if you're going to, it's worth it. Go check it out. It's a refreshing take. And if it successfully expands into a good trilogy, it'll be a good one. Hopefully. I think. There's reasons to believe it will be. And I really do think they did an interesting job at exploring Gotham City, exploring the problematic, complex issue of civic corruption. They weren't endorsing it. They weren't saying bow down to it. They weren't saying blindly accept it and fight against those who are trying to expose it. They're saying, thank God we don't live in a world where a billionaire has to dress up in a suit of armor in order to take down and hold accountable those willing to commit mass murder to prove some sort of political point about the corruption in our world. It's bad enough that the bad guys are willing to do those kinds of things, right? And as I've said repeatedly on this show, for various reasons, talking about real life scenarios, if you think you're the good guy, but you're full of rage and hate and bias and a sentiment that is about rationalizing and excuse making and making it morally, quote unquote, okay for you to behave in ways that would otherwise be de facto evil, villainous, bad guy behavior, then maybe you should question your self-appointment as a good guy. You should question your use of that language of calling yourself a good guy, because maybe you're not. There's a fine line, right? Like, yeah, in the world as we know it, in the reactionary, oh shit, look what that bad guy over there is doing, we got to run up to that front line and step up and confront them in the ways that can bring them and their bad guy behavior, to a halt. That's what, Batman is a sci-fi sort of gothic, steampunky detective novel, gizmo James Bond, it's got a little, you can't deny there's some similarities there. And Sherlock Holmes' sort of influenced character, that it's original in his own right, very American, and very much quietly taking a stand against the most American thing that in Americana, which is like run around strapped and shoot anybody that gives you problems. It's like, what? You can't live like that. Rambo Jesus is not a valid thing, America. Stop trying to shove that down other people's throats. And so like Batman is Batman and Iron Man. Not my top absolute favoriteest of all superheroes, for reasons that I don't even know how to explain, because it's got to do with like otherification. Like Batman and Iron Man have one thing, they are the exception to the rule because they are otherwise normally, part of the evil corporate overlording that would be going on in the fictional world, and that arguably can be pointed out in the real world. They are rare exceptions to the corruption that they're fighting. And I like, they're still human, they're flawed, and I like that. But I feel very otherified. I'm not talking about the otherification of the characters. I feel a very othered person, and I identify with othered people. That's why Superman, Spider-Man, and some of the more, these guys are not from around here. And are, there's a complicated issue about like how they're accepted, and it is their altruistic commitment to a sort of egalitarian, I have a responsibility to take care of others because I am impervious to that which would, which makes it impossible to take care of these sorts of things, right? I recently did just rewatch DC's Man of Steel. I have this weird paranoid thought that there's a Superman movie I have not seen yet that's out there with this guy. What's his name? Cavill, Henry Cavill. And his version of Superman has at first sort of like didn't hit me the right way, but has grown on me. I recently, I think, posted about this. Out of everybody that's played, or I think I maybe recently talked about this on the show. Out of everyone that's played Clark Kent that I've seen, he's my second favorite. He's my favorite modern guy to do Clark Kent. He's my favorite choice now. Christopher Reeves being my all-time favorite. He's just classic 80s rom-com, sappy character actor that still fits in a plausible movie, in a real movie, and in a superhero movie. It's like cheesy, edgy comedy. Not edgy. Cheesy enough comedy that's like, it reminds us the warm, fuzzy nostalgia of like things like the Batman show, but can still be something a little bit more realistic, or, hit a little harder. But I digress again. So, friends, the Batman movie, I want to give it a strong B+, with room to grow into a middling A-, maybe even an A over time. One of the things I did question as I watched it the first time is, is this movie going to be super eminently rewatchable for me? Right? Or not? Some movies I can rewatch without ever once hesitating. Some movies I know I can rewatch, but I gotta be in the right sort of mood, and I can't feel like I just recently rewatched it too recently. Some movies I know, even if I try to forget, I don't feel like I ever want to rewatch them. And the jury's out in that department, so I don't know. But honestly, I think that if you're a superhero comic book fan, enthusiast, or even sort of just part-time occasional viewer, it's worth a go. I can't tell everyone to like a thing just because I like it. Have your own opinions by all means, and bring your commentary to the community. And you can find new avenues of being part of the community over at solo.to /Mr. Zeppo. I've also made it easier for new people who are interested in listening to the podcast, find the top biggest places where the podcast is distributed. And I will later on try to confirming my new maximum number of links that I can put on this link profile landing page. Try to get some of the other ones that I know are on the RSS feed, but maybe aren't as big because they're not. I put all the big top tier ones that Sprecher itself promotes there, right there with Sprecher. So if you are curious about the podcast, are into podcasts, have never heard of Sprecher.com before, but want to check out the podcast, I know it's weird I'm promoting this in the podcast, but there you are. Welcome. And maybe you're listening to a Sprecher episode, or maybe you're listening to a YouTube episode, but you've got one of these awesome podcast apps and you'd rather be listening to it on that, but you don't know if I'm there. Now you can check the list, and I'll be adding the ones that aren't there, but that my show is being distributed to slowly, gently over time, because that stuff is tedious. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. There will be more episodes of the Totally Irrelevant Media Review, which, yeah, you know what? We're going to be hitting this thing like a bell. I especially love movies. I love action movies, right? I got no beef with action movies. There are some action movies that mindlessly, pointlessly, disgustingly glorify violence and have nothing to say. There are some movies that talk about complicated issues that have to be resolved through violence because military, because sociopathy, whatever. There are movies that deal with violence and are whimsical fantasy things and don't acknowledge the violence at all, but there it is. And there are movies like this, The Batman, right? Like, the thing about the Joker that was evocative was that it showed you a rational path as to why this particular expression, this particular iteration, this particular, what do they call it in Loki's world? This particular replicant. No, that's from Blade Runner, which I think this Batman had a little bit of Blade Runner in it, you know, like in Batman world, like he was a detective and he's going to be stoic about it. But anyways, what was I saying just then before that? I forgot. This Batman movie makes it clear. And although like Bruce Wayne, the guy, whoever he is, the person behind those two personas wrestles with their thing. Questions whether or not what they're doing is making a difference, whether or not it's worth the effort, but he also expresses his passionate commitment to it. He frames it as his family's legacy. Like Alfred's like, dude, your family's legacy, you're endangering it. And he's like, no, what I'm doing is the legacy. He'll figuratively burn his monetary empire to the ground in order to make enough of a difference by being the Batman. And he overtly calls out people for their corruption. Like he deals with the Penguin, right? And sometimes you got to deal with people. The Penguin is in a sort of interesting position in this film. Not to go on a random tangent, I haven't talked about it this entire time. Obviously, one of the obvious things already gotten lots of coverage and discussion in the public Discord world and in the media world. That was not Colin Firth. That was, what's his name? That makeup was amazing. That if they didn't already, that should get all kinds of nominations in the technical awards ceremony world. Because that was amazing makeup, and it was he looked great. Colin Farrell, not Colin Firth. And it was an interesting take on the character. He was already late in his career. He hadn't met the Batman, but he'd already encountered some of the justice that the Batman seemed to inspire out of Gotham PD, because there's this thing in this particular backstory of the immediate backstory of this particular version of the film that, you know, they've already had the biggest mafia drug bust in the history of Gotham, right? But of course, obviously, the whole thing is exposed as part of the political theater of the corruption, run by the corruption, where like the core institutions of the city and of the what's the word? Of the charitable world of social services and whatnot is just through and through completely part of the corruption. And the Bruce Wayne, as the Batman, as Bruce Wayne, has to contend with the reality that he didn't have an understanding that his father came dangerously close to being part of that corruption, and that his father's legacy, his own charitable, one of his, many charitable foundations or whatever, what do they call it in this? It's not the Wayne Foundation. Presumably there is a Wayne Foundation. I'm going to grant canon things in there, separate from the Wayne Corporation. And that whenever they talk about the Wayne Empire or the Wayne Legacy, they're talking about a bunch of different things, because Batman's always been known to be like a complete and complicated charitable thing. Although, curiously, in this world, this Bruce Wayne has to face up to a reality that like he's not doing much in that world. I realize my assumption was probably wrong, because he does get called out by the up and coming, fresh, young faced political fighter, the new politician that's fighting for justice, that's kind of sort of the female minority, what's the word I'm looking for? Representation that's there in the similar space that you could sort of see she might become a bigger character. She might be, she's in the similar space that Harvey Dent has gone through. Not to say that she is going to become a Harvey Dent-like character, but that Harvey Dent is one of these up-and-coming hopes for the city in the political, society, social world of the city. So Ms. Real, Bella Real, calls Bruce Wayne out. His father had been an active, giver of charitable donations, but apparently this Bruce Wayne isn't doing much at all. So my assumptions going into the movie were something that I realized get called out and that I appreciated, but I didn't then reevaluate and incorporate into my understanding of the movie, because then I said something that was incorrect about the film. And I find that even more fascinating, right? So the struggle there is real, I think. The whole point of dark, gritty fantasy, action fantasy, one of the problematic flaws, let me back up. One of the problematic flaws of your baseline generic gunplay action genre is that it's baseline sad, raw fundamentals of human behavior, and it's rarely a nuanced exploration of the problematic issues inherent in taking vengeance and seeking to extract justice beyond the scope of the law, right? Like we get the Punisher. We get what was that Licorice movie about a mom with weapons training because of reasons that I don't remember, who then just goes on a rampage, right? And going on a gun rampage against truly evil, villainous people that are getting away with it and that the law has no capacity to do anything about is a popular theme. We love us our good guy outlaws, right? Hello, Westerns. Hello, Bonnie and Clyde. What's his name? It was Sundance what is it? Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In the world of cinema culture, we have our affinity and our problematic appreciation for characters that choose to solve their life problems by engaging in criminal activity, right? And we make iconic heroes out of, like, we love a good bank heist film. I love it for the technical reasons, and because they tend to have a narrative style and structure that's like mystery based, but isn't about murder, and is usually intellectually stimulating, and it is not a tedious puzzle thing. And that's another thing. We can come full circle and talk about the Riddler again. He gets like a C grade for me. The movie gets a B plus. The Riddler gets a C. The Joker isn't in the movie, but the deleted scene gets an A minus because I'm not super excited about the makeup and the weird hair / hair loss thing that they got going on there. But it was interesting, and I'm not going to hate it. But the Riddler, the aha moments of solving the things weren't that aha momenty. Right? Like, here, what's the biggest, flattest, saddest problem with any kind of mystery, police, drama, investigation procedural? It's when they're just like, what's the biggest problem with Batman movies? It's when like the production design is like way out of control. The superstars are way out of control. The script is got no real meat to it. And everything's about sort of playing at solving the mystery. Because the mystery is this overdressed, super cartoony character is doing things with their henchmen that are bad. And there's some sort of speech, and they're mad at Batman. Right? Like, if you're going to critique and drill down on the genre, if you're going to just call Batman its own genre, that's one of the saddest, saggier elements, that when it's bad, it's bad. Sorry, Mr. Freeze. Like, what is he doing? Why is he a criminal? Because he's frozen and he's got to stay frozen, so he's got to attack people and freeze them so he can live frozen? And art needs to be stolen, so diamonds. What? I don't know. Maybe it made more sense in the comic books. Also, that's always been true about comic books to a certain extent because it's fantasy, and you got to come up with, no matter what you're writing, you're coming up with criminal scenarios, trying not to be too overtly criminally, because you don't want to inspire and or incite criminal behavior, right? We're supposed to be cheering for the good guys, the right side, the white hat. And although Batman wears a black cowl, I just called him Black Man, and that was completely accidental, bad slip of the tongue, to be quite literally true. Batman wears a black cowl, which I think, despite looking like hand-stitched leather, is bulletproof. Even though, like, shoot him in the mouth and it's game over. And he's taking a stand against all those who are willing to victimize, abuse, beat up, terrorize, steal from, and murder. And he's doing it at great risk of his own life, at great exposure to his own, above board empire, no matter how you slice it. In this case, very gothically melodramatically, I'll spend every penny and let the empire collapse. And he's doing it without resorting to lowering himself to the same level of violence that the bad guys are doing. Forgive me for coming around full circle to saying the same thing over again, but I mean, they did that well. It managed to be stylish, iconic, completely its own thing, satisfy some basic action tropes. You get a great car scene, a great car chase scene. You get a weird, interesting reimagining of some really iconic fundamental characters in the Batman universe, and sort of get to see them in fresh new ways. You got representation going on. You've got a surprising twist, right? Like, what is Catwoman? At her worst, she's a sexy lady that in an unnecessarily objectifyingly sexy outfit that likes Batman and runs around doing stuff that sometimes helps Batman. In this movie, I mean, I guess arguably you can critique it and say that it did contain all those things, but she's also a person. She's a whole human being. She's a complete person. She's not an evil person, but she's someone that grew up. She didn't choose to be a criminal, but she grew up sort of entangled in the circumstances of the criminality of all of those around her. And she's trying to, she is a criminal. She's a cat burglar, right? But she's trying to like live some cat burglar fantasy of getting out, like getting her due and getting the fuck out. And she's intrigued by and tempted by and sees the nobility of Batman's Boy Scouty commitment to, whatever I do, even if I call myself vengeance, which doesn't make sense because there isn't any vengeance in the law, right? Like, I guess I could consider that but then if he wasn't that, then he wouldn't have a learning curve. He has a learning curve. By the end of the movie, you're wondering if in the second movie he's given up the cowl, right? Has he hung up the cape? Speaking of which, I'm also really into costume design, and this Batman costume is pretty awesome. I kind of really like it. And I can really nerd out about some of the details. Not gonna, because I've already been rambling for way too long. And my critique is that I didn't love the gross pea soup, army green, soft, squishy, what the hell kind of mask is that mask? It wasn't a gas mask, which I think would have made a little bit more sense. Especially, doesn't he use some kind of gaseous thing at some point? No, he doesn't. Does he? No. But it wasn't a face shield to protect him from weapons. Like, it was cuckoo crazy. It was like, what is this? And then, the fact that his legion of followers just imitated it, and it's sort of useless, except that it's weirdly iconic. Now, the question mark graphic, whole different thing. Totally like it. I totally appreciate the Zodiac Killer crossover aesthetic that the director openly acknowledges he was going for. I saw it, I appreciated it, I understood it, I registered it. I just didn't like I would have liked more of, what would have been super creepy and that I thought it was going to be whilst I was avoiding watching the trailers, because I generally, for certain properties, I just avoid trailers. Like my comic book favorites, I'm going to avoid trailers as much as possible until when I'm going to watch the movie, because I'm going to watch the movie. So here's a trailer. Boom. I would have liked, I thought it was going to be, I would have appreciated more of a, and I don't know what these are called, but like an actual, are they made of lead, but like a bulletproof, something out of Call of Duty Mobile, like I'm a crazy gun person face shield, right? Helmet thing. They played with that aesthetic a little bit in some of the TV shows, if I remember correctly. But obviously, I don't know how much crossover there is in production teams. There probably isn't a lot. I would, if theoretically, in a fantasy world, if I was on the production team and I was sitting at a production table as the assistant director, let's say, my ideal position, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, media world, I would have spoken up at whatever appropriate time in the correct, design, big idea meeting where we're talking about the characters and their big look and their design concepts in big pictures. And I would have thrown out the suggestion, hey, can we consider something that looks like, and I would have pulled up Call of Duty Mobile and shown the examples. Not this, but up this alley. As if this character, keeping everything that they developed and whatever, honoring what the character as they envisioned it as they're developing it, in maybe like a black and green motif with a little bit of gold for the icon, for the like gold filling, gold filigree, like borrowing from that Japanese craft of like fixing things that are broken with gold. Even though I don't know that I would want him to decorate his mask that way. I don't know, it would be very smart as a bulletproofing thing. But like a bulletproof, like it snaps together in an interesting, weird, surprising, but like believable, functional way. That's about like, you're going to try to shoot me in the head, so boom. And then like functional, keeping the rest of the visual motif of the Riddler, especially when you see them, I mean, they do sort of look like like the guys at the end of the movie that are Riddler enthusiasts that show up to commit the terrible, bad, this is not good, they shouldn't be doing it. terrorism, gun violence at the end. They sort of look like, to borrow from a visual motif that's from video game world, like a squad of homies all wearing the same skin, in Call of Duty Mobile or something. And it's like a goofy looking skin that I would never use it, right? Unless it was more like a home, like not homemade, but like he was like one of the crazy things the Riddler was really, if somehow one of the crazy things the Riddler was magically really into was chemistry and blacksmithing. And he made his own bulletproof, like green fatigue. I'm not in an army, but I'm building my own army of hyper-intellectual terrorists. Because let's be blunt, that's what he is. Right? That's what would have contributed to the design thing. Because the fact that he's running around doing this in flimsy plastic, I get it. It's a choice. And it says something about the character. It's not spooky and scary. And it doesn't make him very smart. It just sort of makes this sort of okay smart guy seem a little bit loony bins. And that's fine. It's workable. Ultimately, I found that this character was smart, but he obviously... And at first I thought I was kind of being smarter, but really it's part of the movie. They want them both. That scene I keep coming back to that I think is pretty clever and one of the better scenes of the film. The scene I wouldn't have cut to make room for the Joker scene is when you realize, spoiler alert, that this Riddler guy, this mastermind, who did make some clever things, although some of his riddles were kind of like, in their wording, were sort of like, meh, not that great. But also, they're fundamentals. They're not that hard. They didn't give me a headache. They didn't make me, I didn't go, wow, shit, what the fuck? But oh crap, did I just totally lose my train of thought? I think I did. They both shared a flaw in common, which when I realized it and thought about it and really had my aha moment about it, I went, I really like it. The Riddler forces Batman to contend with the reality that he's not as smart as he wants to think he is, right? The world's greatest detective is one, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no. He's described as Gotham City's vigilante detective. The world's greatest detective is a phrase that I personally associate with Sherlock Holmes, but if I'm not mistaken, has been used in association with Batman, or some wording similar to it. Gotham's greatest detective, perhaps. Smartest detective, most brutal detective, I don't know. But he's forced to confront that he missed a lot, right? Like, what happens at the end? Why is he forced to go to Arkham to talk to the guy? Because the plot is not done. The problem is not over. The mystery is not solved. And Batman didn't save everybody yet. And the Riddler's like, ha, you're not as smart as you think you are, Batman. And we get the satisfaction. To me, it was very satisfying. I wouldn't have directed the scene to play out the way it did vocally. I would have done something other than that. But setting that aside, because it's a really surface critique, it's great. I think it's awesome that we get to a moment where, like, you think we're about to get this, like, oh no, what happens next? Now, so what? The Riddler knows he's Bruce Wayne. Is that some sort of setup for a sequel? What's going to happen? Is there an email bomb that's going to go off that's going to release a bunch of digital imagery that proves that what is it? And they've toyed with it all along, right? It's part of the Riddler's crazy wall. It's up on his corkboard. Ba-dum-bum. Bucket of fish. Put it up on the corkboard that I have a corkboard, whatever that means. And if you don't know what that means, it's okay. You will eventually. Just keep listening to this show. Keep listening to my podcast. I explained it a few times, and I'm sure I'll explain it again. But he didn't know. He was calling out Bruce Wayne and the corruption that Bruce Wayne as a person has to deal with in his family and in his empire, right? But he didn't know. He wasn't calling out Batman as Bruce Wayne. Bum, bum, bum. That was the spoiler alert. That was the spoiler. We're led right up to the precipice of believing, right up to the brink, that he must know. He's about to tell him, dude, I know who you are. You're Bruce Wayne. I'm going to fuck you up this way. And it's not. And where that scene that worked, right? Where the scene fails for me is that we didn't get enough of a sense before, leading up to it, of the inclusion. You know how and curiously, the movie opened, like the Riddler's identifying with Batman, the way that end of that scene plays out, it's like the Riddler was living under the delusion that Batman and him were in cahoots together, remotely, quietly, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. We are on the same side. Now, it almost worked. There is a great line. I love the line that, you showed me that all it takes is a little bit of focused violence and something else. Discipline and a little focused violence. That's terrifying. That's a terrifying line. And it's a great line because we're all supposed to get our hackles up and go, wow, that sentiment is what drives people beyond the line, beyond the pale. You can't think that way and think you're going to win and then do all these horrible things that are exactly what evil, horrible people do and think you're a good guy, right? I would have loved a little bit better setup. Ironically, as I was about to start talking about, the movie begins in first-person perspective with the Riddler, and I didn't get what was going on. I was like, is that Bruce Wayne? Is the Riddler replacing the Joker as the person that was old enough to see Bruce Wayne as a little kid? Like, I don't get it. What's going on? No. And obviously it wasn't. It was someone else, and it all makes sense. Something that might have really helped or worked for the aha moment that they wanted, I think, and this is spur of the moment. Again, my mind always works when I talk about media, when I talk about art, when I talk about film, when I talk about theater. My mind goes to a place, one track, one level of my mind is always like, if I was sitting around at the biggest of the most important design meetings as an assistant director, what would I add? What would I be like? Yes, and I don't know about this. I definitely don't like this, and here's why. And here's what I want to take it to the next level and let you guys run with it, right? But just here's my ingredients, add them to your palette. If the Riddler had that same kind of creepy stalker relationship that he has, that we see and we spend a lot of time in with the one of the many people that he's targeted Bruce Wayne. I would have loved to open the film, instead of someone we don't know that we've got to figure out who he is and who is this kid, who is this wife, is it Bruce Wayne? It wasn't, right? It was somebody else living in a Bruce Wayne-like super house, and it was a little confusing. What if that had been Bruce Wayne, right? What if that had been Bruce Wayne? And we get a little bit more of there's a level of Bruce Wayne we don't see in this movie, which is Bruce Wayne being Bruce Wayne in public. That's usually a trope, and I get why you would avoid it. We get a lot of like showing up to the party, going to the event. I'm at the opera. Like, great, we've seen that. We get it. Bruce Wayne has to do that. We get a little bit of that with the funeral, but it's sort of this interesting inside out take, which is great. And it works out. It turns out to be a crime scene, and he's got to defend his identity. If we had started the movie with the Riddler stalking Bruce Wayne, it would have connected some of the dots that don't make sense. And a little bit of a progression, like maybe instead of a lot of time spending stalking one person that leads up to a horrible crime that triggers the beginning of the movie action, what if we had a little bit of a opening montage of confusion where we're like, this guy's stalking a bunch of people. Who is he? Why is he stalking all those people? And we could have entered the world of Batman as the detective vis-a-vis this character spying on Bruce Wayne and him not realizing that it's Batman that he's spying on. And maybe sort of trying to spy on Batman and failing because he's hard to track. He's hard to find. You never know when he shows up. So doing that obsessive compulsive news clipping thing about Batman, right? And having, one of the kitschy things about superheroes is when they have secret identities and they have public personas, that people don't go, wait, that's the dude with the mask. That's, really? Could Superman is Clark Kent without glasses or a tie? Like, I don't know anyone that would be fooled, confused, or lost about me. They'd just be like, Mr. Zeppo, why are you flying? Like, bro, what the fuck? How can you do that? Batman has a lot more levels of it. He can really portray a specific kind of style, a specific kind of image in his Bruce Wayne-ness, which is, I think, one of the areas that we've missed out on. It's been underutilized. Tuxedos and stereotypical tropes about being rich. We could really get a classy, sexy, interesting, engaging, dynamic look at a fashionable dude that's living his moral ethic in his billionaire empire, right? Where's that? So all of those things, probably the more I think about it, the more I can come up with critiques. But I'm sure that one of the things that's going to happen is as the years roll on and I keep doing the podcast and I keep doing totally irrelevant media reviews, I'm going to come back and revisit movies and or properties that I really like. And we're going to have to just talk about them again. But for today, that's that, friends. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show by visiting solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and clicking through and visiting the other websites and engaging in the content. Speaking of which, if you're wondering what's there, one of the things you can go visit is the SoundCloud account for DJ Zed and Mr. Zeppo, where you can enjoy more of the digital robot dance music known throughout the universe as, the delightful shenanigans of DJ Zed. Thank you for tuning in. I will be coming back at you a little bit more daily, a little bit less almost. So stay tuned for more. The incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's totally irrelevant media reviews is a special segment of the almost daily ZenCast, a production of SeaTag Studios, a completely imaginary production studio that exists entirely in the imagination of my mind. Unless otherwise noted, all views, opinions, ideas, suggestions, anecdotes, ramblings, criticisms, critiques, and commentary about the intellectual property, all of whose rights remain those of the original creators in this special series, are entirely my own. No one told me what to say about this particular media property, and I do not, no infringement of Warner Brothers or whoever holds the rights to the Batman are intended. Is intended. Is not, infringement is not intended. Ah, bless it. Sometimes the words come out in funny order. Peace out.